Hello, I'm James J. This is the beginning of week 8. I think I'll start us off with a poem by Louise Gluck. Louise Gluck just won the Nobel Prize in Literature, and it's been quite a few years since an American has won the prize, and also since an American poet has won the prize. So it usually goes to the novelist, it seems like. So it's kind of exciting news, and I think I'll start off this week with Louise Gluck, Lover of Flowers. In our family, everyone loves flowers. That's why the graves are so odd. No flowers, just padlocks of grass, and in the center plaques of granite. The inscriptions terse, the shallow letters sometimes filling with dirt. To clean them out, you use your handkerchief. With my sister, it's different. It's an obsession. Weekends, she sits on my mother's porch, reading catalogs. Every autumn, she plants bulbs by the brick stoop. Every spring, she waits for flowers. No one discusses cost. It's understood my mother pays. After all, it's her garden, every flower planted for my father. They both see the house as his true grave. Not everything thrives on Long Island. Sometimes the summer gets too hot, sometimes a heavy rain beats down the flowers. That's how the poppies died, after one day, because they're very fragile. My mother's tense, upset about my sister. Now she'll never know how beautiful they were. Pure pink with no dark spots. That means she's going to feel deprived again. But for my sister, that's the condition of love. She was my father's daughter. The face of love, to her, is the face turning away. So, a poem by Louise Gluck there. And as I mentioned, I'm starting this week with her because she just recently won that Nobel Prize in Literature. So some exciting contemporary news for us from the world of literature. And and that'll also get us hopefully into our mindset of thinking about language in a little different way than the ways that we normally write and communicate in day-to-day discussions, and get us moving more towards the way we've been talking about writing for our purposes in this class. So, what I'd like to do today is do a little bit of the housekeeping, a little bit of review, what we've done and where we're going. And to do that, what I think I'll do is I'll start out talking about paper number 3. I'm about 2/3 of the way through grading those, at least at this point. If you're viewing the video, it's a Monday, so I'm about 2/3 of the way through. I'll have the rest of those wrapped up in the next day or so. Looking good so far with paper 3. Tough assignment. I think that this was a fairly difficult assignment. There were several folks that had contacted me beforehand with concerns how to begin, how to get things started, and we're getting stuck sort of right off the bat. And I think that was probably more common for a lot of folks than even those handful of folks that gave me calls. So I think that was going on sort of silently for a lot of people. The good news is there were still a lot of good results, and some of those concerns turned out you managed to use those concerns and shift them into your writing and make it work. So that was great. It was, like I said, it was a tough assignment. There were a few folks, if I put comments along the lines of not exactly what I had in mind, but work on this or that or the other thing, that's probably fine. It's sort of like a swing and a miss. I think that some folks really, this is their the best of the 3 papers they've written so far. This is the best one, and for whatever it was, it just, the sort of oddness, the quirkiness, or something about that, it just hit for you. And you really nailed it. For some folks, this is the weakest of the 3. It's just something that you just got snagged on, and I think that that's normal too. I sort of imagine what we're doing with our writing in response to the different art forms, whether it be in this most recent case theater, or before we're responding to visual art, or before that with the first paper responding to other styles of flash fiction that we've been reading. So whatever the style is that we're responding to, sometimes you're going to hit it off with that form, sometimes not so much. So like meeting people, right? It's you might be if you're at a party or a get together, and there might be some folks you connect with right off the bat, and some it just doesn't work out. It doesn't say anything about you, doesn't say anything about that other person. And same way that with your writing, it doesn't say anything necessarily about you in terms of whether you're responding to a certain form and it really works for you, or whether it doesn't at all. So just something to keep in mind as far as with all these projects that we go through, they're going to be different from assignment to assignment, and the course is designed to get us a broad range of different art forms that we're responding to through writing, and writing in different ways too. Right, we've been writing with working on fiction. Now we've moved to this to nonfiction, creative nonfiction. Towards the end of the semester, we'll be moving towards poetry. So we're writing in different ways as well. So that the idea is to get us interacting through using writing with all sorts of different art forms. And hopefully, it gives you a chance to, in the same way, if we're going to continue this idea of going to a party or a meeting and running across multiple people, it's going to give you a chance to meet some folks, right? Get a chance to network a little bit and see what works for you, what doesn't. It's the same thing with these art forms, right? And things, of course, can change over time. If this absurdist theater, this Waiting for Godot type of theater, that didn't strike you, well, maybe it didn't strike you right now. Maybe 6 months, a year, 5 years from now, you run across some other sort of odd play like that in a similar vein. Maybe it works for you then. Hard to say. Conversely, it may really work great for you right now, but then you've moved through that phase maybe a few years down the road. So things change. I encourage you to keep experimenting, trying different things. So, but the overall paper threes, they're still pretty solid for a tough assignment. And like I said, some folks really, this was their best work. And I know that several of them, folks contacted me and they were apprehensive about how they were going to get this thing done. And they finally, in the end, they finally got things really, going. So that was great to see. So that's my quick summation of paper 3 and what we're up to on that one. And I think for the most part, I hope people found it enjoyable, even if it was something that the play itself was like, man, I just don't get this thing. What's going on with it? Some folks actually even use that the frustration or just not finding the thing very approachable. They use that for good writing results, and that's great too. So that was paper 3 in a quick summation. If you do have any questions about the comments that I send you for everyone, I'll I attach a file, or I send you a file back with my comments from line to line. Put throughout the paper, as well as sort of a few sentences, general category back with that email. I know a couple folks had a hard time with the attachment not coming through on their side. If you're in that spot where you should have on this paper or in any of all 3 papers in the future papers, you should have a few sentences, general summary comments on your paper, and then some sort of attachment with the particular notes for different areas. Throughout your paper that should be going through. If that's not, or if you get stuck with if any of that gets stuck, make sure to let me know. We'll find either an alternative email to send it to you if your filters on your side or taking that attachment off. We'll figure that out. So just make sure to please let me know so we can get that corrected, because I think it's actually the attachments with the detailed specific stuff that's probably more useful, at least hopefully more useful to you when you're putting together your revisions down the road, or thinking about what operated well in that paper and what you can continue to do going forward with other papers. So that's paper 3, and that's going to move us towards paper 4 in a minute, which I will. It seems like we're kind of going at the fast pace, but that's sort of the way the semester goes right now. But I'll start talking about paper 4, which will be in a lot of ways doing what this last paper, what you've been up to in this last paper, with a slight little variation. That is to say, you're going to be responding to a reader, to one particular reader doing a reading. So, and you'll need to go through and find that person, whoever you might want to respond to. So it'll be a little bit different than what we're up to, but not by a whole lot, right? Stylistically, it'd be about the same thing. So that's paper 3. Talking about paper 4 for the potential future, and then also I wanted to make sure to cover a couple of other things as we were going through. I also we just had our quiz for this week that was at the top of the module, and you ended up responding to the Barbara Hurd short several pages that she had, and regarding the sounds and how your sense of sound operates within your writing. So I hope that was useful to you. We also, at the same time last week, I had that little YouTube link to Jack Kerouac back in the 1950s, reading from one of his novels with Steve Allen playing piano while he read. And so that was also the idea, to get used to that sense of sound and how that operates in your writing. And it doesn't matter whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction or poetry. I mean, we associate poetry the most with the sense of sound being important. But Barbara Hurd, of course, would contend that that's something for folks writing fiction or prose. That's something they should also have in mind as well. So I found that to be a useful essay to read when thinking about those things. What we've been doing with this class, of course, is one of the last things we do as a proofreading tool is to read it aloud. That's why we recited and recorded that first paper several weeks ago. So the idea is to get your ear involved as well as just visually your eyes on the page. So keep reading stuff aloud. You let your ear get involved to help make sense of things. I think that's probably a good skill, not only for this class, but something you can use down the road over and over again. So we had a little Barbara Hurd. We'll have a little bit of reading coming up for the for this week, and that'll be our next quiz. On that one, we'll be returning to our flash fiction anthology, and I'll have this particular assignment written up as well within the module. So but we're going back to this one. And let's see, what we're going to be looking at is on pages 102 to 104. Like I said, I've got that later on written down in the module. But that's just a short piece where it's Robert Butler. And Robert Butler will be talking a little bit about the difference between a prose poem and a short story or short fiction. So I think that's something that we hadn't exactly talked about as far as the comparison of short fiction to poetry. I've had people ask a little bit about that in some of the comments, or make comments along those lines, like what's the difference between a short story, short fiction, and poetry, as far as they both don't take up typically as much space compared to your novels and that type of thing. So what is the difference in how they work? And Robert Butler's the first person to start talking about that directly. What I'm doing with this essay is a couple things. One, I'm wanting to set you up for when we do get to that poetry section. In fact, that's what we've been doing in some ways throughout the semester, by having just little splashes of poetry at the beginning of each one of these modules. And so it sets us up for where we're going with writing poetry in the last third of the class. And so he talks specifically about the prose poem, and just to make sure that you have all the terminology down. So the prose poem would be a poem without line breaks. So typically one of the defining things of poetry is it's got the line breaks, right? You look at a poem on the page. If I go back to shuffle my books here, if I go back to that Louise Gluck poem that I just had, if I were to show you this on a page like this, you look, and even just that quickly, you don't even have to hit pause, but that quickly, if you were to look at that, and I say, is that prose? Is that a novel, or is that poetry? And you could look at that and you say, that's poetry, and I'd say, why? And you'd say, because the line breaks, right? We're used to thinking poetry and line breaks. There is a weird thing that is called the prose poem, comes out of France, is associated with Baudelaire, and goes back, a little more than a century and a half, and it's basically the poem without line breaks. So that, and there's all sorts of reasons that, as far as for its origin, and where that thing comes from. But what's the difference then between if you have a poem without line breaks, so prose poem, and a short story? Well, you read, if you're curious to find out, read some Robert Butler, and he talks about that a little bit. And also, I think that the main thing that he gets at is to think about how the idea of the epiphany works in writing, as far as that aha moment, or that moment of revelation, that moment of understanding. And he would contend that within the short story, there's this kind of brief, quick understanding that becomes part of how the plot of a short story works. It's not going to have all the conventions of a longer plot like in a novel, because obviously there's not that much space to let the thing unfold in the way that it would in a novel. So for the short story, it's more of that pop, or more of that epiphany, is what he contends. And this will be part of an ongoing conversation where we talk about how does plot work within the short story, or how do you get a reader interested in what's going on in that short story, what's at stake, how does within the 500 or so words, how does your story unfold and in an interesting and engaging way for the reader. So what can you do in that short amount of space? This is Robert Butler's take on that. It's only several pages. As with any of these assignments, I encourage you to get on those early and see what you see what you come up with. Maybe even they're short enough that you can read them through a second time, process them. In that way, I hope it's enjoyable and useful for you as a writer. If you put them off to the absolute last minute, and because we all have busy lives, and you can't get to that thing the last minute, and you're kind of running through it real quickly, I think it's harder to process that. I think it's a tougher way to make that useful for you as the writer. So if you can get to that thing early, get at least a first reading done on that, and then maybe consider it a little bit, give it a couple of days, come back and read it again. So that will be Robert Butler helping us transition from the flash fiction and into thinking a little bit about how poetry works as well. So check my notes and where we're at on our module. I want to make sure, like I said, this is sort of my housekeeping part of things to make sure that we have things in order. I mentioned sound with Barbara Hurd, Jack Kerouac in last week, and Louise Gluck, of course, winning the Nobel Prize in Literature. And we talked a little bit about paper 3. So what I'd like to do now is talk about paper 4. So paper 4 is coming up before we know it. It's going to be due October 23rd. It's actually a Friday. That's not a typo when I put that in the assignment. I know most of the assignments have been due on the Thursday. But with paper, I think there was some sort of like fall break or something when I looked at the calendar where it said no classes on that day. So I know that we meet online, so we don't fall exactly in that calendar. But I didn't want to make something due that day if for whatever reason the holiday threw you off on your schedule. I think it's a university holiday as far as a fall break, that type of thing. So I just put it back to the next day. Get an extra day on this thing. I would still say start it early. Make sure to get that thing done with plenty of time to spare. So assignment 4. So it's titled Nonfiction in Response to a Reading by One Author. Okay. So this last time you did a response to Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. I selected that play for better and worse for everybody, and then you ended up coming up with your written response to that play. And this time you're going to use the same sort of skill set like you did in the second paper, where you had to go out and find the visual art that you were going to respond to, and you could, the virtual anywhere on the internet, the virtual world was at your disposal for doing that. We're going to do that same sort of thing with this fourth paper. This is nonfiction in response to a reading by one author. What I'd like you to do is go out and find a reading by one particular author, hopefully someone you really enjoy. I mean, you could find someone that you couldn't stand, but I don't know why you'd want to keep viewing something by someone several times by someone you couldn't stand and then having to write about them. But hopefully someone that you enjoy and maybe even want to champion a little bit, as far as it's an opportunity for you to find a person that perhaps is not that well known. I mean, they can be very well known or not that well known, but perhaps if you find someone that's not that well known, you can end up doing more of a review. And then that might be something you could even try to land or publish someplace as well. So that might be something to consider. But the main thing is you'll be finding an author. And what I do in the assignment handout is I've got several links to YouTube videos. I've got Tim Siebels, who's absolutely wonderful poet out of Philadelphia, and he's got a terrific reading cadence and voice. And it's his little video that I put a link to. He's receiving an award, so it's a very formal setting. The second one I have by Robert Hass, who was the poet laureate of the U.S. Some years ago, and he's reading several haiku, and that's also a very formal type of reading. Margaret Atwood, I have her reading a short poem, and Margaret Atwood's in more of an interview type of reading format, and so that's a little different than the first two. And then the fourth person is Erin Stalkup, who is reading creative nonfiction, and she's in more of a reading setting that's set up at a pub or public house, and so it's a little less formal than those. So I'm trying to get you different authors, different styles, and in some different settings. For examples, if you potentially liked any one of those four folks, you of course could do a little bit of searching through YouTube or searching for other videos and get a little bit more to go on. It's probably worthwhile to get, 15 to 20 minutes, maybe about 20 minutes reading from a writer that you really like. If you just have little, I've got on my examples, they're mostly shorter so that you can kind of get a flavor for each one of these writers without having to commit 20 or 30 minutes per person, right, while you're just making a decision. So just give you a little flavor. On your own, it'd probably be worthwhile to find some more. So you could pick any of those writers. We've also talked about, we saw Louise Gluck at the top of this module, Jack Kerouac. There are all sorts of folks that you could pick, but we've had some examples of people giving readings so far with our videos. So if you wanted to follow up on any of those, you could. And I think that those potentially could be pretty useful. They're all fairly famous folks. You also, but you don't necessarily have to pick someone that well known or that famous. You could certainly find someone that's more regional, more local. I also include in the assignment a link to the UNO writers workshops, and those are all done virtually this semester as well. I think that there's only one that will time out with us exactly. It's David Philip Mullins. It's reading on October 14th. So hopefully, if you check this early on in the week, you could get a chance to tune into that. They don't. I went to the page to look at their link for that, and there's a connection. Where you're supposed to get some information. That link is not working. I sent a message off to see what I could do about getting some information. But I'll post in our announcements beforehand, and I'll get that verified how we want to confirm for the David Mullins reading on October 14th as part of the UNO Writers Workshop Series. So if you want to catch that one, or if you've been thinking about catching that anyway and have seen some announcements around, that would certainly work well with what we're doing. So there's all sorts of potential here. I think the main thing is pick someone that you absolutely enjoy, that you think this would just be a blast to get a chance to listen to them and see them reading, and that you'd want to go through a couple of times and check it out. So as far as range of a typical sort of review versus more of a creative first person type of narrative response to the prompts, I mentioned with Beckett. Beckett has had close to 70 years of being reviewed. So if you're going to give a literary type of review, you probably need to be a Beckett. Well, you don't have to be, but it probably would help to be a Beckett scholar, because people spend long stretches of time and much of their career examining and writing on Waiting for Godot and other Samuel Beckett plays. So having just a straight review wouldn't necessarily with Waiting for Godot be that useful. But having something where we bring in the first person, we bring in you as the narrator, where you step into the response and become a character in and of yourself. That can be pretty useful. A lot of folks lean towards that side with Godot. In fact, one of the things that I didn't mention in that summary that I did want to come back to with what was pretty successful with Waiting for Godot is that a lot of folks that came from military background completely recognize that sort of idea of waiting and that type of thing, so that a lot of people jumped in on that particular angle. Combine that, so even though something was written, almost 70 years ago, almost post World War II, Beckett had survived and fought in World War II behind the enemy lines in France there, and that sort of horror and terror that he experienced there. They could connect that with their own lives, and they could through the military or through that or through whatever aspect that seemed to come together, that people seem to really get that. Also, of course, with that, the COVID-19 pandemic, with this notion of waiting, and how we're all in this sort of limbo in different ways, from a lot to a little, depending on what our background is and what we do for a living. And so people talked about that, but it made sense with Beckett to get to that more personal angle, because you had something that was so well known for such a long period. With this, you might do so with paper 4. If you're responding to someone, especially if they're not as well known, then it might be worthwhile to stick more on just the basic summary review. That might make more sense. There may not be a whole field of study devoted to this person, and that might be something that you could help with. And it'd be something, I think about it too, and I mentioned this in the syllabus. In some ways, we become champions through our writings of certain either authors, right, or either certain styles, whatever that might be. So that might make sense if you find an author that's just, it's not all that well known, but that you really are interested and think that people should be listening to this person read. They should be buying this person's books, following this person more closely. This is a chance for you to potentially to write a paper that would help champion that person. So that might be some way to think about it. You can still, of course, do the same sort of thing where there might just be a certain aspect, particular part of the reading that really grabs your attention and relates to you personally, and then you can talk about that with the I, with the first person, and talk about that more personal, particular details, right? So there's that whole range. Beckett, I probably tried to steer you more towards that first person and talking about a more individual response. With this one, I don't know. I might lean, depending on what you pick, I might lean you a little bit more towards more of a basic summary review, and with the idea that they'd be something that you're writing that might be beyond just this classroom. It might be something for publication. Along those lines, I do think that anything you write in here, that you should consider it at least for potential further publications, so that you'll want to be writing it for the sake of this class. But also, it might be something down the road that you'd want to send somewhere, and so that this could be a good opportunity to get a review and try to place it in a journal or someplace online that might be, that features that type of essay review type of writing. So that's paper 4 in a quick nutshell. I've got I'll have that prompt also out for you, so you can look at that in more details. But I wanted to get you an idea of what we'd be up to, and it'd be the same sort of 500 words that we've been working with. As before, I do ask you to include a link to whatever reading you're responding to, so that we get a chance to, or I can get a chance to at least check out a little bit of it. It might slow me down if they're 30 or 40 minute readings by everyone. I might kind of just get a little flavor and kind of just pop in and out of it if it's the longer reading. But it's kind of fun that I can take notes and potentially come back to those things, because I do want to get papers back to you in a timely manner. So if I sat there, as with some of the visual art, some of the great visual art that I received the links to, if I sat there and really got absorbed to each one of those paintings or pictures, I would never get the comments back on your paper. I'd never get the grading done on some of those official particulars that we need to engage in. So with the readings, I do want to at least get a flavor of who you're responding to, and I'll probably tune in for quite a bit of it. I try to space all this grading out so that it works out, that everyone gets a pretty, hopefully, even amount of time, and I get everything back to you in a reasonable amount of time. So, but if you could make sure to include that link, and then shoot me an email when you're done with that paper, attach it to me, attach that file, and I'll get it graded up and back to you. So that is the summation of paper 4. As with previous papers, if you have any questions, shoot me an email, ask me. Worthwhile to get started early, so that way it's fun, it's enjoyable. You'll want to be using all the terrific writing skills we've been working on throughout the semester, as far as give that thing a good title that's engaging and interesting. The first couple of sentences, you want to hook the reader in, right? So make sure to do that. You work with the idea of showing the particulars as opposed to summation with overall telling. So show the details as opposed to telling the readers what they're supposed to feel. Potentially closing with an image or closing with something specific. So all these things that we've been up to, we'll want to continue to do that, but we'll be doing it now in response to one particular reading. So I think that there's a lot of stuff there, and hopefully a lot of fun stuff for you. The idea is I want it to be enjoyable, and I want you to use your writing as a tool to consider another person reading and see what you come up with. See what you unpack by using your writing as a tool to do that. So let me double check to make sure I've got everything so far. We are looking good. We are making good progress. We're about halfway through with week 8, maybe even ever so slightly over halfway through this semester. And it's been a wild one. So that as I mentioned, I think the other week, that a lot of folks take classes, a lot of folks graduate from school and get degrees, but not everyone does it during a pandemic. Or at least it's been 100 years since the last group of folks did it. So keep plugging away. I think that so far the effort in this class has been absolutely terrific. I'm seeing it in the papers. And if you do have problems or get snagged somewhere, by all means, shoot me an email. We'll see if we can get you unsnagged, and keep going. We're at the halfway mark, and I think we're off to a tremendous start for this first half, and looking forward to the second half. Good luck with paper 4. Email me if you have any questions.